Um, Welcome everybody to this meeting of the Northwest Battery Park City Project. I'm Nora Majonic of Arch Street Communications, and I will be moderating tonight's meeting. A couple of housekeeping items before we turn things over to our speakers. We have a very big agenda tonight, and we want to leave lots of time for Q&A. So if you signed on with a phone number and you're able to change that to a name, please do so. Double check the name on your picture. Sometimes they end up being somebody else's, and if you would change it so it's yours, so we know who we're talking with. We are going to, I'm imagining that as we go through, you're probably going to be coming up with some questions that you would like to have answered or some comments that you would like to make. What I would ask you to do is to go to the chat on your screen and pull down the Q&A, enter your zip code and your question or your comment. We will be collecting those, and after the presentation itself, I'll be sharing the questions with the speakers so we get through as many of them as we can. If we can't get through all of them, or if we need to do some work to respond to them, we'll be posting a printed Q&A document on the website at a later time. So everybody is on mute other than the speakers, so be sure to use that chat option to share your questions and your comments. I'll remind you of this again when we get to the QA at the end of the presentation. So let's get started. I'm going to turn everything over to BJ Jones, who is President and CEO of Battery Park City Authority. BJ.
Thanks, Nora, and thank you everybody for joining us right now on this presentation, and for those who will be checking it out later. Just as a reminder to everyone that we post a whole host of information on our website regarding all of our resiliency projects in an effort to try to get the word out about what we are working so hard on. And you'll be meeting more of the team later, although I think most of them are familiar faces to you, but I just wanted to take a few moments to kick things off. So let's go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so this is the agenda for the meeting, and really the main goal here is to provide you with an overview of the project area and the objectives of this effort, and to begin a dialogue with the community about this project, as we have with other resiliency efforts. And so, you know, at the outset of this new engagement, we wanted to start getting your thoughts and feedback, as well as your questions early on in the process, so they can help shape our path forward. And so we'll talk a little bit about the framework we're using, and you'll meet the team, as I said, but really we'll kind of get into the overall review of the project and what's ahead. And then we'll leave a lot of time at the end for you to raise any questions or provide feedback to this project team. Next slide, please, Nora. Next slide. So, you know, as I mentioned, we have a lot of information online, but we, you know, this team here and our staff at the authority make every effort to engage the community on these projects. And so just, you know, wanted to remind you that this project will be no exception, and we'll be engaging the community along the way, as we have in the past with all of our other resiliency projects. As you can see here, we've had lots of meetings, some that we've held ourselves, others that we've attended to present information on our various resiliency initiatives, and we certainly have benefited from a lot of the feedback we have received. And so hope that you'll continue to stay engaged and apprised of our efforts. But also, again, as a reminder to, avail yourselves of all of the information we have online, documents and videos and more. In fact, I think today, this meeting marks our 25th community presentation on resiliency initiatives. So again, thanks for your continued interest and involvement. Next slide.
All right, thank you, BJ. We're going to turn things over now to Heather Morgan, who is the Director of Climate Risk Adaptation for New York City region at AECOM. She will be introducing the team, talking about the project, and explaining some of the goals. So Heather, turn to you.
And I'm sorry, Nora, but before I'm going to preempt Heather, because I would like to talk about the progressive design build structure just a little bit before we hand it over to her. Heather, if that's okay.
Yeah, fine.
Yeah. You've been hearing already us, using the terminology progressive design build, and I did just want to talk a little bit about that. In April of last year, the state legislature granted us the authority necessary to utilize design build, which is an approach to projects like this that enable us to more closely integrate the design and construction work. And it's very useful for a project like this. That kind of synergy is really helpful. It certainly can yield opportunities for cost and schedule savings as the project progresses, and we endeavor to achieve the design and performance objectives that we'll establish in concert with the community. But an important note is that this isn't simply design build. We're utilizing a variation of that framework called progressive design build, which has a number of milestones along the way that give us a little more flexibility and, which is important to us, give us the opportunity, not just for the authority to provide input, but also for the community to be engaged on matters of design up front before we get the ball rolling a few more months down the road with the design build effort itself. And so for the first phase of this approach, we've brought on a consulting engineer, the AECOM team, which is responsible for formulating the project definition, which includes the objectives, technical and performance standards, as well as overall design objectives and constraints. AECOM is also going to manage the environmental review process for this project and to continue helping us as they have in the past with the community engagement portion. And so once all of these requirements are pulled together, that's what will be handed over ultimately to a progressive design builder. But we're many months away from that part and focused right now on developing the project definition. So again, thanks everybody for joining us tonight, and spread the word for folks who can't join us to check out our resiliency information. Now we'll turn it over to Heather Morgan, who will tell you more about what the consulting engineer roles and responsibilities are all about. Thanks, Heather.
Great. All right, good. Can everybody hear me okay? I just want to make sure. Perfect. Okay. Thank you, BJ, for the introduction, and Nora as well. Thank you, Battery Park City Authority, for having us. And thanks for everybody that's dialed in today from the community. We really appreciate your time. You're an imperative part of this process. And so it's nice to see you again. It's all our pleasure. So I'm definitely going to introduce the team right now. If I could get next slide, that'd be great. All right, so we have an array of sub-consultants on our team that are imperative to our project in this phase of the project and process. The range of consultants that we have, the roles that they're playing, they run from environmental review and compliance, geotechnical, civil engineer, design, community engagement, MEP, engineering, and cost estimating. So we're very lucky to have our team, and you'll be seeing more of them as we go throughout this process over the next several months. Next slide, please. So you heard from Nora earlier today. You saw her on the south and the north. You're also going to hear from Garrett Avery in a few minutes to talk about the work that was done to date on the north project as well. And then you've already met me on the south, but here I am again today. Thank you very much. Next slide. All right, so how is our team constructed for this phase of the project? Battery Park City Authority is the client, as well as you as the community, both Battery Park City residents, Tribeca and Lower Manhattan, our project partners and stakeholders. There's a list there on the right-hand side of the screen. This is a range of who we're collaborating with on this project. As we go through this process, we will add to it, but we wanted to give you a good snapshot of the large-scale collaboration and coordination that we'll have to do. On the left-hand side is the AECOM structure for this part of the project. Achille Nero is the services director. He's not here today, but you will see him front and center on all the community meetings coming up in the future. You will also see him throughout the life cycle of the project. Once the progressive design build firm comes on, as BJ mentioned, we have several people in this org chart that you will see throughout that process as well. In support of Achille is our team leaders. We had Garrett Avery, as I mentioned, who's heading up project definition and design, myself, and then Celeste Evans for environmental review and permitting from AKRF. The lower tier of team leaders, you're going to hear from them a little bit at the beginning of the project, but once the progressive design build firm is on, you're going to hear a lot more from Marlon, Philip, and Rohan. All right, next slide. So just to complement what BJ had set up from the progressive design build perspective, as I mentioned, AECOM will be the consulting engineer for the first phases of this project. So you'll see the array of services that we will still continue to do on behalf of Battery Park City Authority. On the right-hand side of the screen, once the progressive design build team and entity comes on, they will start caretaking and taking over design development, final design, carrying it all the way through construction, FEMA certification, and operation and maintenance plans. All right, next slide. So let's talk about the project. Next slide, please. All right, so you guys have seen this slide before. You saw it on the south. I'm sure you've seen 100-year floodplains in many of the resiliency projects across Lower Manhattan. We wanted to resurface this image just to make sure that we're all on the same page at the beginning of this project of what it means for the design criteria that we're trying to meet. So this is a 100-year floodplain. So again, in translation in simple language, if a 100-year storm event was to arrive in Lower Manhattan in today's conditions, this is the inundation pattern that you would see. This is, look at the dark blue area and see where the low points are and where the inundation would occur throughout Lower Manhattan. Next slide, please. What this project is designing for, though, is a 100-year event in the year 2050. And so you can see the augmentation or the amplifying of the floodplain because of the level of event that would arrive and where it would go. So just remember this, that as we go through this all today, and we've done this in the past many times, we are not designing for a 100-year event in today's conditions. This flood project is designing for a 100-year event in the year 2050. Next slide, please. And so everyone for the last several years has seen what the New York City region has been trying to do in response, not only to Hurricane Sandy, but any other intermittent events that we have had. It's really important to know that these Battery Park City resiliency projects are part of a larger system of response across Lower Manhattan. And whether we're looking at coastal surge or whether we're looking at storm and stormwater management, all of these have interdependencies and they're pretty much all connected. So you've probably heard these other projects or been a part of these meetings, and maybe it's repetitive for some of you, but we wanted to make sure that everybody starting at the beginning of this project understands the context of these projects within Lower Manhattan. We've got the East Side Coastal Resiliency, the Brooklyn Bridge Montgomery, the Five Seaport, and the Battery Coastal Resilience, all on the East River side and Lower Manhattan side. Thank you. Next slide. So in the project specific for our project today, BJ had mentioned this as well. And Garrett, you saw Garrett before on the north. For this project, we have combined the north project with the west. And so in totality, it's that entire orange line depicting that part of the project area. The other projects that play are designed in tandem with this, as you've seen in the past, again, the South Battery Park City Resiliency Project and the ball fields as well. Next slide. So as we mentioned, in designing for 2050, 100-year event, we've spoken a lot in the past about design flood elevations. And again, just to get everybody on the same page, what makes up a design elevation? That design storm, that first blue bar at the bottom of this, the design storm, again, 100-year event in the year 2050. We then add sea level rise, wave action, and freeboard to arrive at that design flood elevation. Okay, next slide. And so when we take that design flood elevation and we compare it to the slides that we just showed a little bit earlier about the 100-year floodplain, and we compare it to the South Battery Park Resiliency Project and the north to date, this is what you get. On the far left, you're going to see Hurricane Sandy. It has an approximate surge, again, coastal surge of 11 to 12 feet. Today's 100-year FEMA without sea level rise is an approximate range of 11 to 14 feet. And then if you look over as we move to the right-hand side of the slide, the orange bars and the yellow bars are depicting the North Project, the South Project, and an approximate for the Northwest Project. Please note that on the North and the South, we have been able to do coastal modeling, which has allowed us to refine the design flood elevations. And you can see the ranges there. Currently to date, since we just started the Northwest Project, we have not had the privilege yet to complete all the bathymetry, topographic surveys, all that information that would go into our refined coastal model to give you an accurate design flood elevation. So for today's meeting and any questions that you guys ask based on the design flood elevations or the design criteria, please know that this is an approximate range, and that range is going from 15.5 to 21 feet. Next slide, please. So what does that mean to the existing contours and what we have out there within the project area right now? So the black flags that you're seeing there, those are depicting approximate existing conditions for topos and contours. Okay, we have not had the chance to do topographic survey across the 92 acres on the west-hand side. So these again are approximate. If you see the DFE range is from 15.5 to 21. This project will tie in again to the South Battery Park Resiliency Project. And then we've also, like I mentioned earlier, the North has now been combined into this. We did do modeling for the North. So you see those light gray DFE flags from that information from the previous project. Okay, next slide. Next slide. How do we meet that DFE? We've seen this in our design interplay on the South and on the North, where there's a lot of different ways in which we can meet those design flood elevations. These are just examples of the different ways in which we can do it. Some of the flood measures can be static, meaning that they stay still, whether it's sunny outside or whether it's storm events coming. And on the bottom part is a deployable. Those types of aspects or those measures will actually go into gear, go into action at the time of an event. We work really, really hard to make sure that these flood measures are integrated into the urban fabric, and I'll touch on that in a minute. But we just wanted you guys to get an idea of when we try to meet those significant design flood elevations, the wide range of ways in which we can do that. Next slide, please. And so project goals related to flood risk. We obviously want to reduce the flood risk related to future storm events. Again, and I'm sorry if that's repetitive, but all of us to get on the same page, 100-year surge event in the year 2050. We also are going to give flood risk reduction to Battery Park City, and there will be residual benefits to adjacent Lower Manhattan communities. Another major goal of the project is to provide flood measures integrated into the urban fabric It's really important that these flood measures are not treated as a separable element, but part of our landscape, part of our culture, and part of our environment. We also want to ensure that this design allows existing use and programming and the aesthetics that are in Battery Park City, that they are retained and that they thrive into the future. And we also want to have a recognition and respect for the heritage of Battery Park City's design excellence and legacy. Next slide, please. And so here is your overall footprint of the project. Again, on the far right, it's going to be tying into the South Battery Park City Resiliency Project, and we'll continue up through over 9A and into Tribeca and BMCC area. Next slide. What's inside that project boundary is a whole host of things. Places all of you call home, multiple design landscape, architectural elements, and a whole array of things that we're going to have to comprehensively and caretake through the entire design process. As you can see, there's a wide range from parks, amenities, playgrounds, esplanades, marinas, high schools, and that's just a list of few. This is a place you call home, and this slide is intended to let you know that the reason we're here in front of you is to make sure we do this in a really good process for what we need to hear you out. Unfortunately, a lot of these spaces are going to have to change in different ways to meet these design flood elevations, but we're going to work collaboratively with you to ensure that those changes are something that you want and that you're a part of. Next slide. And so when we start to unpack that delineated project boundary, we've broken it up into 8 study areas. Garrett's going to take it over from here, and he's going to unpack each one of those study areas. You can get acclimated. We may form sub-study areas as we go through this, but for right now, we're starting off with 8.
Thank you, Nora, and thank you, Heather. Great to be with you all again. And tonight, what I'm going to do for the next few minutes is catch you up on where we actually ended up after our final community meeting for the standalone North project, and share some of the details that came out of our conversation at that point and conversations that our design team had for several months following with agencies, FDNY, Hudson River Park Trust, and other project partners. And then I'm going to spend a few minutes going through each of the non-North Battery Park project study areas where we have, through a series of site visits over the last couple months, desktop study, really started to understand elements and landscapes in Battery Park City, like Heather mentioned, in sort of terms of individual outdoor rooms, where collections of spaces have similar characteristics or maybe are used similarly, or in other cases, they are directly adjacent to one another, but work in a different way. So it's important for developing the performance standards, technical criteria that BJ mentioned at the outset, that we understand it on that sort of almost park level scale as we make our way along the alignment, which when combined together is actually 1.3 miles long, believe it or not. So when we were talking last, it was simply about the North Resiliency Project. And for comparison, that was really only about 2,000 linear feet long, so little less than half a mile. So now we're at 1.3 when all's combined. So that really underscores, I think, the importance of the approach that we're excited to begin taking and looking at each one of these spaces more individually.
Karina, could you pull us back up?
All right, so I think we're good. So as I mentioned a minute ago, when we were last together last July, we were talking about the North alignment, and this alignment you see here being our preferred, which was connecting 2 points of high ground, one inside Battery Park City at the Chambers Street overlook, to a point of high ground on the eastern side of Route 9A. And for those of you that are joining us for the first time, we arrived at this preferred alignment, preferred for the North project at the time, arrived at it through a series of deliberative studies and community meetings like this one over the course of about a year, where we also evaluated other alignment tieback options east of Route 9A that included Harrison Street, just to the south of Northmore, and then Chambers Street, just to the south of Harrison. And through that deliberative process, arrived at this particular alignment as our most preferred for a number of engineering and aesthetic reasons. So some of the challenges we were facing here, of course, are really complex subsurface conditions, years and decades of utility development and abandonment and relocation, as well as just the basic trick of having to cross Route 9A in general with an operable flood barrier system while not interrupting actual service on Route 9A or West Street. I think one of the other complexities we have here, which is slightly different than the West alignment, is that this particular segment actually requires partnering with and locating across multiple jurisdictions. It's not solely within Battery Park City like the West alignment is. So if we can go to the next slide. So just as a reminder, starting from, we're going to move from north to south, from the very end of the north alignment at the intersection of Northmore Street and Greenwich, all the way to South Cove eventually. But here is really just sort of a reminder of where we ended up in the West, in the original North project prior to it being combined with the West. And what we're looking at here is essentially a view that's looking southeast toward Independence Plaza and the borough of Manhattan College. And it's really illustrating a series of flood infrastructure interventions pressed as closely to the building facades as possible to limit the interference with and interaction with the sidewalk and streets. Next slide, please. This segment here is where we are moving south from Northmore Street back toward back toward Battery Park City. And this is where the alignment at the time shifted from the east side of Route 9 to the west side, just north of the Harrison Street intersection. From there, the alignment made its way along the eastern edge of the bikeway at about 4 feet tall or so, until we were able to reach Battery Park City and turn and meet the flood alignment on the Esplanade. So if we could go to the next slide, I'd like to share a plan view that was, the project's final hybrid concept. And when we were together last July, we were looking at 2 different variations on the approach to the North Esplanade. And one of them focused on keeping the width of the platform and the footprint exactly as it is today. And you can see the dashed line indicates where that footprint is. And then the other looked at expanding northward, I believe 22 or 23 feet. What we learned through the last community meeting and in subsequent conversations is that there actually is probably a more appropriate middle ground that doesn't extend all the way, but doesn't necessarily hold the original footprint either. And one of the primary challenges in that instance was the inability for emergency vehicle access if we held the existing width to actually be able to make its way to Rockefeller Park. And that was a major factor for us. We also heard at our last meeting that it was important that both bicycles and pedestrians be able to exist together in a way that is comfortable and safe for everyone. So with a few rearrangements to seating and central circulation, this is where our final concept ended up. All right, next slide, please. All right, so now we're going to jump into the study areas as we're moving forward. And as Vijay mentioned, one of AECOM's roles at the moment is to develop the performance standards, the criteria, and the design approach. Of course, with the community and through this process over the next several months, to ultimately guide the project development by a progressive design build team. So as I mentioned, we broke these into smaller study areas. In Rockefeller Park, we're looking at a really well-established landscape, long, expansive views across green open space. And that is a landscape character that I think we all can picture in our mind, but one that also speaks to all of us. In the case of integrating flood risk resilience into this landscape, we have a series of choices to make, and as concepts are developed, we will go through them. But one of them is simply integrating aspects of flood risk reduction into an existing established landscape. Next slide, please. Here are some images that I'm sure you're familiar with, but for folks joining us for the first time, next slide, please. This is, of course, a northwest view. All right, very good. Next slide is Belvedere, the study area we're calling Belvedere Plaza and Ferry Terminal. And this is a critical area for the alignment for a number of reasons, but it's also slightly unique compared to both of its neighbors. On the north, we just talked through Rockefeller Park and its sort of green, open expanse. And equally open and expansive to the south is North Cove. But in this middle study zone is the ferry terminal. It's sort of a more traditional urban waterfront connection between two places. And this is where the alignment starts to become very tricky along the western edge because of the width, because of extremely complex subsurface conditions. And these things we see will start to influence some of the concept development that is possible in this zone. Next slide, it'll just be a few pictures of the zone. So as you can see here, we have a relatively narrow corridor to work within, as well as high pedestrian traffic and a lot of pressure on the space that is available already. Next slide, please. This is a view of Belvedere Plaza, which is again one of the areas that we are going to have to navigate in a smart and thoughtful way. Next slide. Okay, so the North Cove section is what we believe to be truly the most complex of all the West alignment, and it has most to do with the incredibly challenging subsurface conditions, including path tunnels both in and out of World Trade Center. World Trade Center related infrastructure like river water intakes and stormwater outfalls, relieving platforms that are well below the plaza themselves that support everything we see above ground. It's actually supported by a subsurface structure. So navigating this area is going to be exceedingly complex, but we feel that there are many opportunities to celebrate the existing thematic design with terracing and other aspects. We can go to the next slide, please. Currently view back toward Brookville Place. Next slide. This is a view looking northeast from the south side of the marina. All right, next slide, please. So the South Esplanade is our second to last study area, at least for the time being. And in this section, we really felt that it too has, like the others, it too had its own really special and unique character, really defined by a very strong, visual buffer on the eastern edge of the Esplanade in the form of, a series of residential buildings with open space separating them, as well as public art installation, and then of course expansive views of the Hudson River. We also felt that it is special given sort of the hierarchy of passive and more active recreation opportunities through the segment. So we are certain to be treating this in its own unique way. Finally, if we can move through a couple of the photos here. All right, and next slide. All right, so finally that brings us to South Cove. And this, of course, is a unique design landscape as well. I think for those of you familiar with it, the wooded glade between the river's edge and primary walkways really is sort of a unique experience in Battery Park City and in Lower Manhattan in general. So that as much as it is a unique attribute, it is also one of the primary challenges. In this area, we could expect to see some of the higher elevations on that DFE number that Heather was describing. So it's going to be a series of working back and forth with the community and our design team to really get the performance standards right in this area. With that, I'd like to move to the next slide. And I believe. All right, so Nora.
Yes, thank you, Garrett, and thank you for all of that. Before we move forward, can you go back to Belvedere Plaza? Someone in the chat asked that we do that. So let's just take a quick peek here. Garrett, do you want to say anything about Belvedere Plaza? Someone had asked that we go back to this, and I don't know if you want to touch on this at all.
Sure. So I guess the one thing I'll say, actually, if we could, I think go one slide forward. I'm sorry. Yes, there we go. All right. So, Belvedere Plaza is of course is one of the many significant spaces that we're thinking through how best to navigate this course, and also what exactly the design goals and objectives should be in the zone. As I mentioned, this is one of the really tricky segments that is where the project alignment may transition from sort of the larger expansive landscape intervention to a much more specific narrow corridor. So this area, just generally speaking, is one of the most complex from a design and construction perspective.
Thank you, Garrett. Karina, we could go to slide 45, and I'm going to turn it over to Heather. Next steps. Heather.
Okay, great. All right, great. Thanks, Garrett. Thanks, Nora. I really appreciate it. All right, so we want to watch our timestamp here because we want to get to your Q&A. So I'm going to move through this slide pretty quick. With all these projects, so we can do the coastal model, so we can make sure we're super informed when we're doing our design development process here. We have site investigations. Land surveyors have been out already on site doing bathymetrics and both terrestrial contour surveying, geotechnical activities, and environmental site investigations has begun. And to complement again what BJ had touched on, the progressive design build process, there are milestones associated with that. The request for qualifications is going to go out at the end of this month, August 2021. The project definition that both Garrett and BJ spoke about, we should be arriving to that in January 2022 with the anticipated release of the RFP for the progressive design build firms to submit for in February 2022. The next time you'll be seeing us to talk about what we found as far as site investigations and design development to date will be, right now it's anticipated December 2021. And just for the environmental compliance and review side of the project, existing conditions assessments have begun, and we're working on the EIS schedule that's being developed right now. And so I'm going to turn it over to Nick, communications at Battery Park City Authority, and he's going to talk a little bit about how to send feedback to him post this meeting. Go ahead, Nick.
Thank you, Heather. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, it's great to see everyone, although I know we're increasingly getting back together in person. Certainly wanted to make sure we took the opportunity to make this available to as many folks as we can. So thank you, Heather, and to the team, BJ and Gwen and Claudia and Garrett and Nora. You all know me, or should, or will. You can reach me anytime. Both numbers are there, my office and my mobile, the 646 number. We have a dedicated email address for the resiliency projects as well, resiliency@bpca.ny.gov, fairly simple to remember. You can also reach out to me at any time. We will be back to the community board on a fairly consistent basis. We'll be giving a high-level update in a couple of weeks at the executive committee for the month of August, which is a scaled-back set of meetings, but we'll be there all the same. And then we expect to be back there again in the fall on a fairly regular basis, and back to all of you again on this particular project sometime, I believe, in the December timeframe. So between now and then, please feel free to reach out. We'll have the video of this evening's presentation up on our resiliency site directly, as well as the presentation, and Q&A document as well for all the folks who want to submit questions. We'll get them answered here, and then we'll aim to have them answered and posted on the website as well for anyone who may have missed it, may want to tune in. Or if you think of any questions after the fact, please go ahead and send them to that address or to my email address, and we'll get them answered for you as well. So thanks again to everyone in the team, and I'll turn it back. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. So we're going to get started with the Q&A, and we have a bunch of questions that have been asked, but I would remind you, if you would like to ask questions, go to your chat and go to pull down the QA selection and type your question in, and I'll be sure to get to it. So let's get started. Gwen, you may want to start with this one. The question is, how much will private developers be allowed to contribute toward coastal resiliency with their projects? For instance, seawalls, that sort of thing.
I'm not sure I understand the question of how much will private developers be allowed to contribute. I don't know that I understand that question.
I think the question is, well, let's address how much private developers or building owners in the area would be contributing.
Say that again.
How much would building owners in the area be contributing? Would they be contributing?
For this particular project, there's not any direct contribution anticipated from specific buildings or building owners. There may be specific improvements that the buildings may want to make to their projects in conjunction with the work that we're doing, but this project doesn't contemplate any direct contribution by the building owners.
Thank you. So a couple of the questions that came out of that one, I'm thinking, is about the spending on this project. And so the question is, what is the overall cost of this project, and what part of the total, what is the overall cost of the project, and where is the funding coming from? Reasonable question.
In terms of the overall cost, all we have to work with right now is a preliminary budget number, which was prepared in advance of any the detailed analysis that AECOM is now doing, or the project definition or a design. The preliminary budget number that we have been using has been $300 million. I expect that is subject to change once we get more information, which would happen in the coming months as AECOM gains more information about what we're going to need to deal with in order to make the project happen. So that's what we're using at this point. We will be providing you updates to that as we get that information, the additional information in the coming months.
And a follow-up to that, and then we'll move off of funding. So is the financial information about this project, is that public information? Where would that be stored? Where would that be available, if it is?
Sure. There's information on projects that have already been designed, but again, the information that we have thus far is very preliminary, and so there's not really much associated with any analysis other than the preliminary budget estimate. But as those cost estimates start to come in, and there will be a preliminary cost estimate, order of magnitude cost estimate that will be coming in the coming months, that is something that we can share.
Great. So I'm going to turn this one, I think, Garrett, to you. And if you think someone else should jump in on it, please let me know. And the question is, how much of the original green space is lost with this plan? And what alternatives were and can be considered to preserve that green space?
Sure, so that's a very good question. And it actually goes directly to the work that our team is doing now. Just to be clear, there is currently no plan, and there are currently no alternatives. That is actually the process we're kicking off tonight. So I 100% agree that that is something that we are going to be looking at, and it's one of our criteria that we're already thinking through. It also speaks to the formulation of our overall project objectives, our design objectives, meaning, as an example, it could be looking to try and offset whatever impact or some percentage of impact to existing green space by creating new green space. And actually the North project, when it was a standalone project, actually did that through the expansion of the North Esplanade. It actually created new green space in Battery Park City that was not previously available. So I think there are ways to balance in exactly the way you're asking.
Thank you, Garrett. Heather, did you want to jump in on that at all?
Yeah, sure. I think that I think the older way of looking at flood risk was often to treat the flood features as a separable element. So you're talking about taking your existing landscapes and inserting a hardened structure or things like that. And so as we had mentioned earlier in the presentation, but just to repeat it so you guys can all hear it, is that we will work really hard at retaining, as Garrett just said, about the green space, the amenities, the aesthetics that all of you have and what you call as Battery Park City now. And that we are able to take a lot of those flood measures and tuck them under green spaces so that they're part of green spaces, so that as you walk through the park systems, that you don't even recognize that there's flood risk elements there. So I just want to make sure you understand that even though it might be design criteria to meet and retain, there will be integrated flood features, but those will also have the lens of being integrated into those public spaces as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. So the next question really is about process. And I think that we want to take a look at as much process as we can here. And so Garrett, this may go back to you, or Dawn, Gwen, this may go to you. And if any of the speakers want to jump in, just raise your hand and I'll be sure to come back to you. So the question here is, when will Battery Park City Authority present the details of this proposal, particularly as it relates to the changes to be expected to the existing open space and that which is proposed? The public needs to see the before and after. For example, why and how will Belvedere Plaza turn into a very tight corridor? So some of this has to do with process.
I'm happy to start the answer to that. As Garrett mentioned, there is currently no plan, no design to present. Certainly that is something that, as we have experienced in the past, that develops over time with the feedback and the involvement of the community. You've seen the image of the project area. That's the project area that will need to be utilized in some fashion to create that barrier system for the north and the west segments of Battery Park City. How that is done has not yet been determined, even with respect to the North project. As Garrett was explaining, that we started the North project as a separate standalone design bid build project before we received the design build authority. But even there, we were able to advance the analysis of that portion of the project site to a certain degree, so that at that point there was a preferred alignment, and there were some design concepts that were advanced as to how that would be addressed there. Those concepts, even though they will be folded into this process, will be looked at again. They are not givens. So we will, through this process, working with you and with your feedback and your input in the definition of this project, we'll be looking at each of these project areas. And I think it's really important that we talk about the project definition, because again, the way that this project is going to advance is going to be a little bit different from the projects that we worked on before. AECOM is not coming in as the designer on this project. They are coming in as the party that's going to create the definition. We're going to create the must-haves, the can't-haves for this project, in order to meet the objectives that Heather talked about of the overall project and what we need to accomplish through the project. So I want everybody to understand that there's not we don't have a secret plan or design someplace that we're holding back and not sharing with you. It has not been developed, and we want you to be involved in that process.
Great, thank you, Gwen. Just to stay there for a moment, there was another finance question. Is there a way to understand the overall cost of the 5 projects altogether?
There are not 5 projects. There are 3 projects. Now, there used to be 4. Now the North and the West have been combined into one. So there's the Northwest project, there's the Ball Field project, and there is the South project. I've already mentioned where we are in terms of the cost for the Northwest project. All we have is the preliminary budget number. With respect to the South BPC project, we're waiting for the final 95% cost estimates for a segment of that, but it looks as if we're going to be coming in at maybe slightly in excess of 200 million on the South project. And the budget for the total cost for the Ballfield project, I believe, is around $8 million.
Thank you, Gwen. There's a question here about the 100-year event levels. So I'm wondering, Heather, you may want to start this, and Garrett, you may want to jump in as well. The question is, the design plans are based on models on 2050 100-year event levels. We've all seen how poorly models work, including the estimates versus reality of Sandy. They're also rightfully worried about worst case. What sensitivity analysis was done on these models? Also, what impact of the climate change mitigation efforts are assumed in the models?
All right, there's a couple. Yeah, there's a couple questions in there. So here's the thing: when it comes to models, we have to take the information that is both existing, and we have to inform our models with that information. And so basically, the models are as accurate as your data is that you pull into them. So for us right now, what we take very seriously is looking at how the surge events are going to come in, how they're going to hit the existing conditions. And then in the models, if you're referencing the ones from the North and the South, we then eventually ran those models over the designs that we were putting on the table for how they would perform, and then the level of risk reduction that they would get. What was the rest of the question? I'm sorry, Nora, because I don't have it in front of me.
The question was about sensitivity analysis, and whether that was done on the models.
Let me see. I don't know if Garrett, do you want to talk about that for the North? Because for sensitivity analysis, do you want to handle that one?
Well, I guess what I'll say is that the coastal model is factoring in 30 inches of sea level rise for the 2050 2050s milestone based on NPCC guidance from within the last couple of years. So in addition to understanding existing conditions, like Heather said, the modeling is then stacked with other inputs that are coming from intergovernmental panels here in New York City and generally.
Yeah, I think the reality is that models are our best tools to be able to understand what those future storm scenarios would look like. And models also give us an idea to look at an array of storms. So while models are not a silver bullet, models are some of the best tools that are available. And so I think the question is valid, that models are only as good as the data. But the reality is that like we have to face this, and we have to unpack this, and we have to use the best tools available to give us the best chance at hitting those levels of risk reduction. So yes, models can have issues, and not every model is flawless or perfect. But at the same time, we work really hard to ensure that we understand the array of storm scenarios, and then we meet that with the performance landscape and our design criteria. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, the follow-up to that, and maybe Garrett, you can pick up on this, is whether current climate change mitigation efforts are assumed into the models.
It's a very good question. I think because of the sort of localized nature of the models, they don't necessarily take into account sort of global mitigation strategies. It really is about the conditions within New York Harbor, within this particular stretch of Hudson River. So it becomes hyper localized. And in that instance, it would tend to only take into account mitigation efforts that are already planned or underway by Battery Park City or proposed as part of the project. I think the other important thing to note is that we have not modeled the west alignment yet, or the combined north and west project, because there is not yet an alignment to study. We are coming back several times over the next few years, and we'll certainly have conversations on modeling. But as we sit here now, we're just kicking the project off and have not looked at those technical details yet.
So as you can imagine, people would like to know what the end of the story is. So some of these questions are a little early, but I still want to raise them for you. And one is, what is the difference between our built community today and how the community is projected to be in 2050? And Garrett, is that for you to head into?
Sure. I would also welcome Gwen's
Right.
input here, but from our perspective, I think it's a very good question, and I think it is a particularly good question when you zoom back out and start thinking about Lower Manhattan or New York City more generally. As it relates to the 2050 built condition inside Battery Park City, I think Gwen, maybe this is where you can come in, but based on the current Battery Park City master plan, based on lease agreements, based on a variety of other things, I'm not certain how that built environment would change dramatically in that period of time.
No, the Battery Park City has been built out. The development parcels have been built on, and until we get to a point that's not certainly within any kind of scenario that we are currently envisioning, unless we get to a point somewhere much further down the road where there's a building that would be replaced or change in some fashion. I don't anticipate there being any additional building sites created within Battery Park City based on the information that's available at this moment.
Okay. And are the Battery Park City Authority plans incorporating green infrastructure strategies to reduce threats of coastal flooding? And if so, how?
Sure. Well, I'll take this first. It is absolutely going to be one of the design goals and performance criteria for management of stormwater quality, stormwater quantity, and to the extent that we can in the limited space we have, also for addressing coastal storm events themselves. But green infrastructure is absolutely part of the program. It is also tied back to the published and adapted sustainability plan that Battery Park City has available just in the last couple of years. There are several factors that come into play, not only during design, but during construction, minimizing and reducing construction waste as one example, and during operations as well. So there are several phases where sustainability and green infrastructure are factors here.
I would also reference the green guidelines because a companion document that was prepared to the sustainability plan, sustainability implementation plan, are a set of green guidelines that really focus on some of the specific ways in which those sustainable and green elements will be incorporated into any new projects or development or construction that would be done within Battery Park City. Things like renewable energy, the commitment to carbon neutrality, energy reduction strategies. So absolutely, that will be a very important focus.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Gwen. Heather, did you want to jump in on that one at all?
No, I think we got that one covered. Thank you, though.
Great. So there have been a couple of other questions about finances and how we're paying for this project and so forth. I think what we'll do with those is we will collect those questions and get them into a written response and put that into the Q&A.
Hey, Nora, if I could just jump, I mean, I saw that there was one of the questions that came in, there seemed to be some confusion about one of the answers that I had given previously about the figures that I'd used. So let me just repeat that again. We've gone through the projected cost for this project, and I'd indicated that at this point, all we have is a raw preliminary budget number that we've been utilizing of 300 million, which is subject to change once we start to get some preliminary order of magnitude cost estimates that will flow from the work that AECOM is currently doing. That will be coming in the next few months. When we get those, we will share those. With respect to the South, yeah, I think there was some confusion about how many projects we're talking about. There's the Northwest project, there's the South project, there's the Ballfield project. So there are 3 resiliency projects that Battery Park City Authority has undertaken. The cost figure for the South project, I said, is we're still waiting for the final 95% cost estimate for portions of the South project, but it appears that the total project cost is going to be coming in at slightly in excess of $200 million. And then for the Ballfield project, that project total project cost, and this is not what's been spent, this is the total project cost for including what has been spent and what is anticipated to be spent, is approximately $8 million. So hopefully that makes more sense.
Thank you, Gwen. And to all who are listening, one of the things that Gwen referenced in her previous answer were the green guidelines that are used in the Battery Park City sustainability plan. And so we will bring those into the written Q&A so people can take a look at those. But we have a couple more questions. What green energy, what ingrained, I'm assuming what ingrained, green energy will be considered for powering any and all mechanical needs? What future power needs are being considered to be included? Garrett?
Sure. So this is a great question, and I think we touched on some of those considerations a few minutes ago through the green guidelines and the sustainability plan. But I think it's important to also think about this project in terms of power need. And in that instance, the power need for these types of projects is typically in the moment of a disaster, about, in the middle of it happening, where we might lose power from the grid, or just in advance of a storm coming. So there has to be a reliable backup system, and there are actually several redundancies that are built in to make sure that systems are working as they need to. So power is something I'm sorry to say we're not there yet again, but we're simply not there yet. But it is absolutely on our list, and it's a non-negotiable item.
Well, not being there yet means we have a lot to talk about and a lot to share and a lot to work on together.
That's certainly true.
So with that in mind, here's my last question for you, is we're asking about timing. So what is the estimated timing for the planning of the Northwest project and the implementation? Where are we today in the process, and when might the design build be integrated into the schedule? When is that for you?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. And we provided a set of next steps as part of the presentation, because we are, in fact, trying to solidify the overall schedule for the design process, the EIS, the construction, and pull that together in a comprehensive form for you by next time we get together or before. But I will give you a sense of what we anticipate. We're looking at, as Heather mentioned, we're going to be issuing a request for qualifications at the end of August for a progressive design build contracting team. That would include the team that would do the design for the project, and the contracting entity that would build it ultimately. We would be using the request for qualifications to identify several qualified entities that we would then go back to with a request for proposals early in the next year, in early part of 2022, with the anticipation that we would have a progressive design build contracting team on board by next summer, by early next summer. In the meantime, that doesn't mean that nothing is happening with respect to the work that we're doing with the community. In the meantime, we are continuing to work with AECOM to develop and refine this project definition. And as I said, this will look a little bit different than what we may be accustomed to with our prior projects. It will not be a design. It will be it will involve potential design approaches. It will involve components of things that may ultimately be incorporated into a design once it's put together. But I think you're going to find that you actually have more to say about what the final approach is going to be with this approach. And that's certainly our expectation and our intention. So we won't get to a final design probably for another 18 months or so. at which point then, we would be in a position for the design build contractor to begin construction. So that's the rough time frame that we're looking at, and we'll put a little bit more meat on those bones by the next time we talk, so that it'll be a little bit clearer exactly what the sequence is and the timing is.
Great. So we'll look forward to maybe a slide with dates and a timeline. A question about the project area. The overall project area is this. In looking at this project, what thought, if any, is or has been given to the impact of diverted flood waters on areas north of Battery Park City that so far have had no flood protection planned? Gwen, I think that may come back to you again.
We have had this discussion before, and happy to address it again because it's an important consideration. What Battery Park City is tasked with doing is to initiate and to implement plans that will protect Battery Park City assets. What we have done with the South project is we have identified a way to do that, but that required us to extend our line of protection farther east than the boundary of Battery Park City. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been effective for protection of Battery Park City. Likewise, at the north end of our project area, in order for us to be able to provide the protection that's needed at that inundation point behind Stuyvesant High School, which is a very low point, in order to create protection against floodwaters going around that, we have to extend the line of the project eastward. And what we found in the North project, as that project was developed, is that the endpoint, if we go out, Harrison Street is right around Greenwich, is at Greenwich, and if we take the line back to that point, then that will give us the ability to protect Battery Park City assets. Now, in the meantime, we're also providing some level of risk reduction for other parts of Lower Manhattan that are on the on the dry side of that line. As far as what happens on the north of that, we are very sensitive to their very real need and desire for that exists within that community to have something extended northward. And we are certainly supportive of that objective, but we, as Battery Park City Authority, cannot take on that responsibility. We're simply not allowed to. We are prohibited from doing that. So what our plan and our intention and hope is that we will provide a favorable endpoint for our project that the city or some other effort can connect to in order to continue the flood protection measures northward from there. And as far as I'm not quite sure what the term diverted floodwater means in the question, but we have in the context of the North project, the development of that project, we have worked with HRPK on questions of would the measures that we contemplated for our project in any way be harmful, make their situation worse. And we did some additional modeling that Garrett coordinated with the result coming back that there is no notable difference in the impacts being experienced by HRPK, either with our project or without our project. And so to the extent that that may have been kind of embedded in as part of the question, that is what our position is on that. Garrett, I don't know if you have any further insight you want to share on that.
So it's obviously an important question, and it's one that comes up in every resilience project, honestly. And the extensive study that we have done to date for the Hudson River Basin, the New York Harbor more broadly, and the East River, is that it is really a function, diverted water in general is a function of many things that are not simply related to a project or barrier going in. It has to do with the timing of the storm relative to the timing of tide. It has to do with wind direction, wind speed, and how quickly the storm itself is moving. So there's never a single moment where we can predict that forever and always there will be a certain amount of water in a certain place. It's too dynamic to be able to make those predictions. And we talked about with modeling earlier, we reach a point in the modeling process where we simply cannot be any more accurate than we can without simply being misleading, which is absolutely not something we're interested in doing. Yeah. So it is something that we consider along the way, and it's something that we'll be continuing to talk about as model results come in.
Hey, Nora, could I maybe add something on to what Garrett said too? Just everybody too, this project's going to go through a FEMA certification process, and that's coordination with FEMA Region 2. And part of that review is to ensure that this project doesn't induce flooding in adjacent areas. So just remember, you're going to have the peer review of FEMA looking at the designs and the inundation patterns and the modeling and everything that Gwen and Garrett have discussed, and in order to ensure that this project is not creating an induced flooding environment. Okay, so in case that diverted floodwaters term, if that's what you were trying to hit on, just know that that will also be checked by FEMA Region 2. Okay.
Thank you, Heather. We have a few more questions, but I also want to make sure that we have some space for anyone who is unable to use the chat for any reason. If you need to speak your question, just raise your hand if you would. There's a little down at the bottom, there's a button that says reactions or something like that, and it says raise hand, and we'll get to a couple of those. But in the meantime, Garrett, could you answer this question of whether this project has met or will meet with State DOT to pursue the community's interest in incorporating the median along Route 9A as part of the Northwest Resiliency Strategies?
Sure. So, I think we've talked about this this approach going back to the very first community meeting for the standalone North project, and it really is a concept and an approach that on first pass actually does make a ton of sense, and it was one of the first strategies that we pursued when we began concept development for the North project. What we quickly learned, and I guess to take the easy part first, yes, we have coordinated with State DOT. We have over the last several years. We will be in a matter of weeks talking with State DOT and City DOT again. But what we learned about the median specifically is that it is directly above City DEP's regional sewer connector line. It's a very large line. It's 23 or 24 feet below the street. And we would not be able to place any structure parallel to that line or directly above that interceptor line. So the only thing we can do is what we are is crossing it at 90 degrees in a very specific spot. Otherwise, the median would be an excellent choice, but if not for DEP infrastructure, we would be able to pursue that approach.
Thank you, Garrett. We have two more questions, the first of which I will pose to Garrett, perhaps Gwen to you as well. Yes, other than other than resiliency, what other goals are being included in the scoping of this project, such as public amphitheater seating or estuaries, that sort of thing?
Well, it's a really great question, and I think it speaks to some of the approach that we've described tonight about incorporating goals and project objectives into this project definition for the final design team that do serve other purposes, most specifically weaving and integrating flood risk reduction measures into existing landscapes. So one of the only ways to do that is actually to incorporate some of those other items that are mentioned, such that it is not a loss of green space. It's just it's a reconfiguration of that space, rather than it being a loss. And I think the concepts that have been shared, certainly for the South project, those ethos and design standards apply here as well. Similarly on the north, in the extension of the North Esplanade, as we discussed earlier tonight, that is in solving the resiliency challenge. It is also an act of open space creation, and it did include many of the features that are noted there.
Gwen, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll go back again to the definition that we're putting together. What part of what is involved in that is learning more about what you all would like to see be part of the objectives of the project. So while AECOM and ultimately the project designer can suggest that there are some alternatives that could be considered, whether that be in the form of a performance space or additional seating. It's ultimately important for us to get your feedback and your input on the things that you would like to see become part of the project definition and ultimately the design for the project. So I certainly turn that back and ask that you all give some serious thought to that yourselves, and over the coming weeks and months, give us your feedback on that.
Thank you, Gwen. Last question, I'm going to turn to Nick. And this question is about the Essential Workers Monument. The question is, how does that fit into this? If you would address that.
Sure. Thanks, Nora. And just before I say that, because I don't know what next question I'm going to get, I just have to note for the record that Garrett, your background is just A+. It just looked like $1 million. I feel like I'm watching PBS NewsHour with the bookshelf and everything else. So just
thank you so much. I appreciate
Heather
it.
and Nora, you guys are no slouches. I want you to know. But Garrett, credit where it's due. That just all right. You're putting us all to shame. Essential Workers Monument. That's this. I think I was watching the chat too. It's just probably a Justine question. I think I saw. So it seems actually a long time ago now, but believe it or not, it was only just last week we had announced that there was going to be a new advisory committee, Essential Battery Park City Essential Workers Monument Advisory Committee, to provide recommendations on design, location, and installation of an Essential Workers Monument in Battery Park City. That group has yet to convene, but it consists of individuals from the local neighborhood, the community board, residents, essential worker unions, and state officials. We will work through some potential locations here in Battery Park City collectively with that group, and then make recommendations accordingly. My guess would be, and again, a lot of this is kind of yet to be decided, but not too dissimilar from some of the other monuments that have been built and unveiled in Battery Park City of late that would be incorporated into the plans as as we go. So I know that Gwen had mentioned earlier that 18 months or so down the road, when we have the engineers on board and the folks actually doing the construction and the build on site, what is in place then would be incorporated into the plans in advance of the plans, obviously, but it would be folded in so as not to interfere or unduly delay the necessary resiliency project. So more to come on that, but it'll be incorporated as the rest of the existing built environment of Battery Park City is and would be. Hope that helps.
So we're at 7:30, and before we close, I just want to ask if any of our speakers would like to add anything before we do. And I would remind everyone who's attending that we will be turning these Q&As into a document, and we'll be posting it. So if there are questions that you have that come up later, please use the email that Nick shared, and maybe Karina, you could just go back a slide so we could just have that up while we're closing out. There, just stay there. So we have the resiliency at bpca.ny.gov. Please be sure to send any additional questions that you have there. But I'll go back.
All right, Nora.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I think so. Another question come in. I think Tammy had just sent something to the group.
Oh, she's asking when there will be a public engagement panel and surveys for the new targeted goals that are not included in resiliency for the North and West areas. The only type of public engagement taken in thus far was targeted directly for Wagner Park, and it was several years ago. Heather? Gwen, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I'm eager to hear Heather's response to, but I don't think that we have settled on a specific approach that is focused on surveys, although that's certainly something that is always a possibility. And I really encourage everyone in follow up to Nora's last comments to use the email address and our website as a means for continuing to offer suggestions. If there are particular ways that you think would be helpful to better air or to give a broader avenue for input as to what you think should be the goals of the project that are not resiliency related, then please, by all means, let us know. But Heather, maybe you can talk about a little bit about what your plans are going forward.
Muted. Can we unmute Heather, please?
Yeah. Can you hear me now? Okay, good. Thanks for unmuting me. I was like, I can't unmute. No problem. So yeah, Tammy, I think you're referring to when we did the survey for Wagner Park on the south. And so right now we've anticipated that we're going to see you guys again in December. Between now and then, we're going to be working real hard to reach that project definition, as Gwen and Garrett have described. And so as we move into that process, how we outline that meeting in December will be a buildup from now until then. So we'll definitely work internally to see how we can get a capture session, I think is really what you're asking for, in order to inform what we have in front of you in December. And then what we learned from you in December, and then carrying it forward and to adding on the progressive design build team.
So we have to get ready for December, right? So thank you everyone for being here tonight and for sharing as much as you have. We'll be back again, and please keep the questions coming. So thank you and have a great night. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.